What if I was to tell you that there's a single ratio with the ability to show you any changes happening in a business, whether good or bad? Would you believe me? Well, today we're going to learn about the current ratio. Welcome to My Banker Guide, where we teach community bankers to better understand their customers, because when customers succeed, the banker does as well. All right, here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about how the current ratio is calculated. We're going to talk about the overarching goal of this ratio, when it's used, any rules of thumb. We'll talk about any pitfalls present in this ratio, and then we're also going to talk about what changes in the ratio over time could mean. So first off, how is it calculated? So the current ratio in the world of financial ratios is actually one of the easier ones to calculate. We're going to get the information solely from the balance sheet, and we're going to take the total current assets off the balance sheet and divide it by the total current liabilities. Now, some examples of current assets that would show up on a balance sheet would be things like cash, inventory, accounts receivable, things that are going to be, converted into cash. So I'm going to sell that inventory, collect cash for it. That's what I mean by turned over into cash. Next one is, and you take that number divided by your current liabilities. And so similar to how current assets are things convertible into cash in the coming 12 months, current liabilities are things that you need to pay in the coming 12 months. So maybe you got some bills due to a supplier. That's an example of a current liability. And so the current ratio is you take the total of those current assets divided by the total of those current liabilities. So for example, if I have $100 worth of current assets, $50 worth of current liabilities, that's going to give me a current ratio of 2. So what's the goal of this ratio? Now, the goal of this ratio is to gauge the borrower's ability to meet their short-term obligations with existing short-term assets. Now, that's kind of fancy speak. The way that I always look at this one is I think of it from the eyes of a person, okay? So if I'm gonna go and borrow money to two potential borrowers, one that has, and everything about them is the exact same with the exception that one's got $10,000 worth of cash and the other one's got $1 worth of cash. So if you were to figure out which one is more likely to give you to pay your loan back, obviously it's going to be the person who's got the cash on hand. And the reasons why is because if something happens, that customer is going to be a lot more able to accommodate whatever happens than the other guy. Okay, so maybe there's an unexpected bill, maybe there's an opportunity that they can't pass up that they got to go and pay cash for. That first scenario, they have the margin to work with to not only accomplish or cover what they need to cover, but also pay you back. Versus the second guy, he might have some struggles when reality actually hits. So again, that's what the overall goal of this ratio is to go and show how much flexibility, how much margin that customer has to not only cover what they need to cover, but also what they're not aware that they're gonna have to cover. All right, so when is it used and when is it not used? So current ratio is very appropriate for operating entities. So businesses that are producing, buying, selling something that are actually operating the business, and not necessarily for passive businesses like a real estate holding company. Now, big thing to be aware of here is that these ratios vary considerably by industry. So whether or not that manufacturer's current ratio of 1.8 is good is really going to depend on the industry. And so just make sure whenever you're looking at and grading somebody's current ratio, make sure you're always looking at it from the perspective of what is normal for that industry. And the reason why that's important is so that you don't ultimately make a mistake thinking that there's a one-size-fits-all current ratio, because there isn't. All right, next one, rule of thumb. So as I mentioned before, there is no golden ticket for what current ratio we want to have, but all things equal, higher is going to be better. Because here again, remember, we're going into this from the perspective of a community banker. And so our overarching goal is to go and give a loan out to somebody who's going to be able to pay it back. And so from our case, somebody with a higher current ratio is going to, all things equal, be more likely to pay that loan back. And as a result, a banker's rule of thumb, higher current ratio, the better. Now, let's talk about some potential pitfalls of this ratio. So again, the overarching goal of this ratio is to look at what is their ability to meet their short-term obligations with existing short-term assets. And why that's important is that not all current assets are the same. Because remember, inside that bucket, we had cash, we had accounts receivable, we had inventory. Well, if I got to pay that bill tomorrow, I can use the cash. But if I'm a customer who has a lot of money tied up in inventory, it's still going to show up in current assets and still going to have me a good current ratio. But if all of it's in inventory, well, for me to get that turned into cash, I need to find a customer, sell it to them, and collect it versus just having it in the checking account. So again, big thing with this ratio is that it's viewing all current assets as the same, when in reality, if you got to pay a bill, that supplier is not going to go and take your inventory as payment. They want to have cash. So what changes in the current ratio can mean? Now, at the beginning, I talked about how that the current ratio is kind of a really important ratio, and it's kind of a unicorn in that you can see all of the good and bad that's happening inside of a company, and that is true. And the reason why is because all of that stuff tends to flow through a company's cash on hand. So if that company is experiencing profitability, their cash and their current assets should be going up. If they are currently losing money, that cash and current assets and current liabilities will be going down. On the flip side, it can also be coming up or down for a variety of other reasons. So maybe they have an owner putting money in through an ownership contribution. That's going to cause your liquidity to go up. Now, whether that's good or bad is going to have to depend on you talking with the customer to figure out what's actually going on. So if the owner's putting money in to be able to be a down payment on that new line of equipment because they have so much revenue that they need to expand their capacity, that's a good reason. If the owner's having to put money in because they're currently losing money in the operations, that's a bad reason. So all of these potential reasons, you need to be able to identify and think through and talk with the customer to identify what is the underlying reasons on why we're doing these things to gauge whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. Because your current ratio could go up and down because of contributions from the owner, distributions to the owner. Maybe they are buying equipment, maybe they're selling equipment. Maybe they are borrowing against long-term assets to get cash in the bank. Maybe they're paying down their long-term debt faster just to get rid of it. All of those things cause the current ratio to go up or down, but knowing whether or not that's for a good reason or a bad reason, that's where you come in and being able to talk with that customer. That's the current ratio. Like I said, the current ratio is kind of that unicorn ratio because everything tends to flow through that checking account. So if you're able to go and monitor that current ratio over time and through conversations with the customer, you're going to be in a really good spot to get that loan repaid. Because again, as a community banker, our overall goal is to make sure that when we borrow money out, we ultimately get it back. Hey, if you're a community banker and you enjoyed this video, I got two more things for you. The first, consider subscribing to the channel. And the second, head on over to mybankerguide.com for your free copy of the DSCR cheat sheet. The DSCR is the banker's favorite ratio, so learn how to calculate it, learn what to watch out for, and then how to make sure that you get it right every single time so that your loans are more likely to get repaid.